Welcome to a special edition of the Corliss Barfield podcast. My name is Ted Corliss. Today, we address the issues associated with the catastrophic collapse of the Champlain Towers South building in Surfside, Florida. To date, we understand that there still remain more than 150 people who have not been located or identified, and the number of deaths as of this morning is at 4, with a fear that many, many more are coming. To help our community understand the significance of this collapse and to explore opportunities where our contacts and associates can benefit from this investigation, we're bringing on the professionals that handle these kinds of matters. And we have the real benefit today of bringing on Byron Anderson, a professional engineer. Mr. Anderson is a principal engineer at a company called SEI Incorporated. Not only does he have decades of experience as a structural engineer, as a geotechnical engineer, but he also teaches structural design to graduate students at USF. Welcome, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. Good morning. How are you, Ted?
Thank you. Very well. But let's just begin with a real simple question. It does look like that we know already there have been 4 deaths and a lot more are feared. What responsibilities would an engineer associated with this building have to those lives?
Well, the paramount responsibility that an engineer always has is to protect the life, safety, health, welfare, and property of the public. So we are charged as engineers of putting the public's safety and welfare above everything else. We have to put that above our personal relationships with clients. We have to put that above business relationships. We have to put that above profit. That is the number one thing that we're always thinking of as engineers is how are we best protecting the general public?
Now, you have had an opportunity to look at the building plans for the Champlain Towers. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, information is just now being released, hourly or daily. But are any observations that you can make about the plans for this building? Can you describe the nature of the construction and what you were looking for?
Sure. The nature of the construction is it's primarily a reinforced concrete superstructure with reinforced concrete columns and 2-way flat plate slab construction with a concentration of reinforcement around the columns or the shear zone of the slabs. And then those slabs and columns are supported on a deep foundation system or a pile foundation system that is also incorporated with pile caps. So you may have multiple piles underneath one column and the connection between those piles and the column would be a pile cap. One of the things I would like to point out about this building in particular, this time frame, is that there are several different paradigm shifts that have occurred in Florida and in Florida building codes and legislation throughout the years. One of those ironically occurred in 1981, in which a condo building, not exactly like this, but a condo building similar to this was being constructed in Cocoa Beach. And that building during construction collapsed. And ultimately it was discovered that the reason that it collapsed was because of a lack of oversight and understanding of how the structural elements came together. So in light of that 1981 collapse of this condo building under construction, they passed what is called a special inspector or a threshold inspection law. And what that means is that a building of a certain size, particularly a building that is over 3 stories, over 50 feet in height, or has an assembly occupancy of greater than 500 people, is required to not only be inspected by the authority having jurisdiction or the building department, but also it has to be inspected by a design professional, being a licensed engineer, professional engineer, or an architect that has a specific designation as a special inspector, which I and my other engineers in my firm have that special designation. But what it means is that, again, because of the high risk for the potential loss of life for these larger buildings, then in addition to the authority having jurisdiction performing inspections, you also have this special inspector that is performing inspections of the structural elements to make sure that they are constructed in accordance with the plan. Other paradigm shifts that have occurred in Florida would be Hurricane Andrew in 1992, which caused us to have a better understanding of the construction of smaller structures, not necessarily of larger structures, but smaller structures, and a better understanding of how wind loads affect those smaller structures. And I suspect, that this will be another paradigm shift. And I think that the paradigm shift that may come out of this event is the need for more robust and regular inspections of buildings of this type. You and I talked earlier about the construction of this building. This building is constructed with reinforced concrete, and it's located right on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean and Miami Beach area. And it's about 40 years old or so at this point. And these
Constructed
buildings,
was it constructed in 1981?
1981, that's correct.
Right.
And so these buildings, they're subjected to salt spray and salt water that's coming in off of the Gulf. And
why is it, well, let me interrupt you for a second, but
sure.
why is it that salt water can be just so devastating to a building like this?
Well, what happens is that this building, again, is constructed with reinforced concrete. And reinforced concrete is a combination of two different structural elements. It's the steel reinforcement and the concrete itself. The steel reinforcement provides tensile strength to the reinforced concrete element, and the concrete itself provides compressive strength, but also provides protection to the reinforcement from corrosion. So it encases the reinforcement, thereby protecting it from corroding. What happens oftentimes is that there is insufficient cover or not enough concrete over top of the reinforcement. And over time, the chlorides from the saltwater environment make their way down to the reinforcement, combined with moisture and oxygen, and it causes the reinforcements to start to corrode. Corrosion is an electronic process. Well, just like if we were going to make a potato fan or a potato light, we're sticking in a positive and negative electrodes into one side and making a connection. Well, if you stick those into salt water, you're going to get a better electrical connection than if you stick them into plain water. And so that's the reason the chlorides in the saltwater environment are more detrimental to the reinforced concrete element. And let me follow up with that just 1 second. Is what I said before is that the concrete is encasing the reinforcement and protecting it. Once the constituents for corrosion make their way down to that reinforcement and the reinforcement starts to corrode, it starts to expand. We've all seen corroded metal, at a seawall or something where it's 2 or 3 times bigger than it was originally. Well, it can actually expand up to 6 times its original volume. And what's happening is that expansion is causing internal stresses in the concrete. The concrete is good in compression, it's bad in tension. Those internal stresses are causing tension inside of that concrete, and eventually that expansion of the reinforcement is going to cause the concrete to crack. And as soon as it cracks, well, now you have a direct path for those chlorides and water and oxygen to get in,
which then just starts accelerating it. Right.
The process. Um, and so going back to what we were talking about earlier, the changes that I believe will come out of this is that I think that we will have a more robust inspection program for buildings that are, I don't even think you need to wait 40 years. I think you should be looking at buildings every 5 years or less.
Are you saying those buildings that are in the exposure of that salt spray, or are you talking about what about a condominium, 25-story condominium in Kissimmee that isn't necessarily on the Gulf
Well,
or
I,
on the coast?
I do think you still need to inspect those buildings, but I don't think they need to be inspected at the same interval as the buildings that would be on, the either the intercoastal waterway or the Gulf or the Atlantic itself.
Yeah, I understand. Now, you've had an opportunity to review the report that came out in 2018 on the Champlain South Tower. Any observations that you'd want to make about, like, what was the purpose of that inspection?
Well, the as you drive up and down A1A or Gulf Boulevard, depending on which coast you're on, um, you oftentimes will see these older buildings are undergoing concrete restoration work. And the process of concrete restoration typically starts with an inspection like the one that was done in 2018, or a condition assessment of the building, in which the engineer is looking at the building, looking at what's going on with the building associated with repairs that may be necessary. Oftentimes, when we do this type of inspection, we kind of grade the repairs that are necessary into like critical, something you have to do right away, or something that can be done in the near future, or something that needs to be done as part of a routine maintenance program. Obviously, these condominium structures have associations and budgets and reserves and all these things that they have to deal with, and no association wants to undergo special assessments to their residents to make repairs to a building. So whenever we're investigating, we're trying to look at it and say, okay, these are critical elements that you have to do now. I don't care if you have to specially assess your residents. Those repairs have to be done now. Or it's something that you need to put it into a maintenance cycle, and you need to increase your annual budget so that you can make sure that you have money available to make this repair in 3 to 5 years from now. So to me, that 2018 report is just that. It was step one, kind of the condition assessment. I also understand that following that condition assessment, the engineer that did that also had put together a set of repair drawings associated with the building, which again would be common for this type of structure. And they were in the process of interviewing contractors so that they could get bids to perform the restoration work. I think the key thing that I would like people to understand is that when engineers go out and inspect a property, or otherwise look at a property, and they see a condition in which they deem to be critical or dangerous, that people should take note of that. The collapse like this should never happen in modern time. It should never happen in the United States of America. I mean, that's something that we may see happen, in some third world country as the result of an earthquake. But, we're talking about, to my knowledge, there was no extreme environmental conditions occurring at the property at the time of the collapse, meaning it wasn't during a tropical storm or a hurricane. It wasn't during an earthquake. There's no indication of an explosion occurring. And so the building just shouldn't collapse like that. And there were certainly signs of trouble, that there was trouble brewing prior to this. And I think that it's important that if an engineer or another professional says there's a problem here, I think people need to heed that, and they need to act accordingly, and not just brush that person or that engineer's opinion aside.
And I think this the idea that I deal with so regularly, the idea I try to get across to insurance companies is the element of time. And that is, we have so many matters where we represent a multi-unit building association or a large condominium development or a homeowners association. We all know that there's an issue. It's just that we're arguing with the insurance company over the scope of the repairs. Unfortunately, by not accepting wholeheartedly without pushing back the recommendations that may be made by an insurance company's engineer or contractor, we need to move faster. We should be able to object and say, you haven't gone far enough. The building is in a dangerous state, or it very well could be in the near future. Yet these claims will take insurance companies several months, many times years after they're aware of a problem. And I just hope that maybe one positive thing that would come out of this is that the insurance representatives that are working on projects that are similar to this one or have similar issues will take the element of time and move faster.
Great.
Yeah. Now, do you think that this is foretelling a future of more and more of buildings collapsing like that, like this has?
Well, I certainly hope not. Again, I'm going to go back to what we said a while ago. I think the lesson from this is that buildings of this type, really all buildings, they need to be inspected on a more regular basis. And the findings of those inspections need to be taken to heart. And whenever an engineer makes recommendations that something needs to be repaired, then actions need to be taken in order to move towards repairing that. Or if an engineer says that it's a dangerous condition, temporary supports need to be added, or the building needs to be vacated. All those things need to happen. There's certainly been cases in the past that I've been involved in which I've said something was a dangerous condition, and I've lost a client because of that, because the client didn't want to hear me say that something was a dangerous condition.
Right.
But at the end of the day, again, my duty is to protect the health, welfare, safety, and property of the public. One of the things that I wanted to talk about briefly is that from a structural engineering perspective, we really are, it's a pretty simple concept. Everybody hears structural engineering, they think, oh my God, that's so complex. It's so full of math. It's just crazy.
Oh, there's some math in there.
But the math is really simple. You have a less than or equal to sign, and on the left side of that, you have the loads that are applied to the building. Those loads are dead loads, which is the weight of building materials, the weight of the building itself. Live loads, which are the weight of the occupants of the building and their belongings. So people, furniture, things like that, those are all considered live loads. And then you have environmental loads. Those environmental loads are, in particular in Florida, our biggest environmental load we're concerned about is wind. But we also have flood loads. In other parts of the country, you're also concerned about earthquake loads. These are the environmental forces that are acting on the building. So on the left side of the equation, we have those environmental live loads and dead loads, and we combine those all together. And then on the right side of the equation is the resistance to loads. And that resistance comes from the geometry of the structure and the material associated with the structure. So the basic concept of structural engineering is to make sure that the right side of the equation is greater than the left side of the equation with an acceptable level of safety. So the building code defines that acceptable level of safety. That's structural engineering in a nutshell. And combined with that, from a structural engineering perspective and a design perspective, we are designing not only to prevent collapse of a building, but also we're designing in the event that there is a structural overload that occurs, that the failure of the structure will be ductile or slow in nature and not brittle or sudden in nature.
Which is what we had here.
Which is
right.
what we had here is a
right.
brittle, sudden failure of the structure. Now, there may have been telltale signs of ductile failure that was occurring that were not heeded that ultimately led to this brittle failure or sudden failure of the structure.
And we just, at this point, we don't know. It's not been published other than this 2018 report. And I believe there was also a report that was issued in 2020 by another engineering firm addressing at least portions of these structures.
Well, there's a couple different theories that are floating out there, and it's likely going to be that there's a combination of some of these theories. One of the theories is there's been a long-term settlement-related issue with the building, that the building is settling differentially, causing damage. Another theory being that there's, again, 40-year-old reinforced concrete that is in need of repair because there's a degradation of the reinforcing steel. And then also we know that there was construction next door that started a few years ago and has been ongoing. And anytime you have construction on a neighboring property, well, that's the time to have an enhanced inspection and observation period of your building if there's something being constructed next door, because those neighboring construction activities can certainly have the tendency to cause damage to your property.
Understand. The next steps with this building, my understanding is that of the 136 units, I believe 55 of them are essentially gone. What do you do with the rest of the building?
Well, the rest of the building is going to have to be demolished, for sure. It's, first of all, it breaks my heart to think of all the lives that have been lost here and all the family members. Many of them probably will never even have the opportunity for a proper burial for these people. It's going to be reminiscent on a much smaller scale to 911, where there's going to be some people that just are never going to be recovered. And the building, the remainder of the building is going to have to be demolished. At the end of the day, someone like myself or another structural engineering, likely a team of structural engineers, is going to want to be involved in the process of investigation and demolition of the rest of the building, because at the end of the day, until you go out there and collect some additional facts, you're just speculating what the cause of the damage was. And at the end of the day, we need to know why this building collapsed for several different reasons. One of them being so that we can learn from this collapse. Again, as I said before, there's been paradigm shifts in building codes in Florida and throughout the country. And those paradigm shifts come from an understanding of exactly why failures occur. So, I kind of gave you the basic understanding of structural engineering from a load and a resistance perspective. I would say canon number 2 for structural engineering is understanding failure and designing so that failure doesn't occur again. I do a talk for elementary school kids about what structural engineering is, and I start by taking a pencil and breaking the pencil. And part of structural engineering
that was my pencil.
Part of structural engineering is understanding at what point that pencil is going to break, and to be able to mathematically calculate the at what point and what force the pencil is going to break, so that you can understand what the stresses are that are occurring internally. And then you can extrapolate that into a myriad of other dimensions and sizes and everything else. So to answer your question, we need to know what happened so that we can try to prevent it from happening again. You know, and the other side of that as well, you know, something that I wanted to make sure that we talked about here today is that as structural engineers and as code officials and building officials and researchers that work on building codes, we're basing everything that we know off of historical events. So for instance, you know, if we were to design this building for wind loads, we would design it for, you know, potentially 180-mile-an-hour wind load. Well, that's based on historical accounts and historical records. My concern from a structural engineer is that as sea levels rise, which we know that sea level rise is a big deal in the Miami, Florida area, as sea levels rise, as the climate changes, as things heat up, that our models that we've based our designs on may no longer be accurate. And what we may end up with is that a lot of modern buildings that aren't capable of resisting the new world order and the new environmental forces that are being shed upon them because of climate change.
Well, I think these are good lessons for us to consider, with the hope that they are picked up by the appropriate people. Reaching out to those members of boards of directors for various multi-unit properties who work very hard at what they do. They are most of the boards that we deal with, and I know you deal with, are typically volunteer lay boards, which means they're on the board not because of they have a particular specialized knowledge of construction materials or structural engineering, but more so because they have a commitment to their community to work collectively to act in the greater good of everyone who lives or is visiting those particular properties. I really appreciate your comments and your testimony today about that, and would encourage those associations out there that have a building that is older than, say, 25 or 30 years to have a conversation about this, not necessarily run out and hire engineers to examine your property as much as let's keep this on our radar so that those properties don't end up like this one did. Byron, I really appreciate you coming in today to chat about these things. Again, Byron Anderson, principal engineer with the firm SEI Inc., brings tremendous amount of experience working with property. He works with builders, works with insurance companies, works with insureds who have disputes with insurance companies, those kinds of things. So a great resource for those.
And SEI is Structural Engineering and Inspections Incorporated. So
very good.
Get the name out there.
All right, good stuff. All right, Mr. Anderson, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ted, and let's say a prayer for those people that are missing out there.
We'll absolutely do that. We appreciate your time watching our podcast and video cast, and we'll continue to publish information about this loss as well as those things that are of importance to property managers, associations, and others that live in these kinds of communities. My name is Ted Corliss. Be well.